One of my favorite things in romance anime is when the premise asks questions that really break the mold. If we're being honest, a lot of shows in this genre start from a familiar place. High school students finding love while living a mostly normal life. That's not a knock though. A lot of my favorite stories start from that very same spot. And just because two shows share a beginning does not mean they end up in remotely the same place. Look no further than Gals Can't Be Kind to Otaku and I Made Friends with the Second Prettiest Girl in My Class from this season, where they both appear poised to be centered around love triangles and end up taking entirely different paths. Still, I have a soft spot for when a story goes in a completely different direction and interrogates love and connection from all of these new and interesting angles. I can't figure out why Even a Replica Can Fall in Love is not more popular this anime season. It's not getting great review scores and just isn't generating a ton of buzz in general. Each week, I see its episode discussion threads slowly dwindle in engagement. And I feel like I'm going crazy, because this is some really good television. Sure, its animation is good, but not amazing, and the studio that makes it is not one of the big powerhouses. But that's almost beside the point. What makes Even a Replica Can Fall in Love so spectacularly interesting is its premise and the deep philosophical questions it raises. Our protagonist, now, is a replica. A doppelganger created when her original, Sunao, had a strong emotional episode and summoned this other self. That alone raises a million different questions, but things get really complicated when Now falls in love. So while this may look from the outside like your typical high school romance, it is instead an intimate inspection of what identity, relationships, purpose even are when you get down to it. Because if you're a supernatural recreation of someone else, every routine part of life becomes an existential question. My favorite part about Even a Replica Can Fall in Love is that it actually asks these questions and finds the answers. It's very dramatic as a result. A cascade of causes and effects that just barely run their course before another character jumps into the fray and introduces another whole slew of things to explore. And the core of all of it is love, both romantic and platonic. Why wouldn't I love it? So let me give you a few more selling points on this anime, keeping it mostly spoiler-free, and maybe you'll check it out too. And then, at the very end, I'll give a big warning before diving into some specifics that I really found fascinating in the more recent episodes. This anime's focus on the entirety of a supernatural situation like this is one of its coolest parts. A replica like Now is going to grapple with the big questions about identity, sure. But what about stuff like how summoning and dismissing a replica works? What memories are shared between them versus kept separate? Does one feeling pain impact the other? This show thinks about all of the ripple effects as much as we do as viewers, and gives answers to those tactile questions. It's really satisfying, and makes the entire premise feel well thought out. Almost like a well-constructed magic system in a fantasy world. The coolest part, though, is when the thin layers of this universe get separated. This isn't a huge spoiler, but Now isn't the only replica that shows up in the season. I'll be showing a bunch of side characters in this section to throw you off the scent of who I might mean. But by having more than one replica, the story gets to demonstrate the different ways that doppelgangers can exist, the myriad of relationships that they can have with their originals, even how they feel about existence itself. This show explores every nook and cranny of its premise, and is still turning over new stones more than halfway through the season. By having Now be a replica, it gives a whole new perspective to the high school romance anime archetype. You can tell this literally from the poster for the show, so I don't think it's a spoiler, but Now falls in love with a fellow student, Shuya. There's all of the obvious questions, like how would love work when you get faded in and out of existence at will, and those get answered. But I also love how it strips down the very nature of romance itself. When your identity is tenuous at best, love doesn't become impossible. It becomes everything. That relationship is the only thing you know is yours alone. Something you created out of thin air, like your original did to you so long ago. So even if the broad outlines of Now's romance look just like any other high school anime, the context changes everything, gives it a deeper meaning that isn't so easily imitated. It's not just limited to romance though. Now's relationships to the entire cast of great supporting characters all get boosted by this core premise, made infinitely more intricate and complex due to the very nature of her being a doppelganger. I mean it when I say that it's special, a supernatural twist given the time and care to flourish into something actually thought-provoking. Okay, now for some real spoilers. Check the video chapters on the timeline if you want to avoid them. You've been warned. In the most recent episodes, when Suzumi was revealed to be a replica herself, I was actually rolling my eyes a bit at the start. I was afraid that the whole show was going to devolve into a million different replicas, and that their stories would blend together. But then she gave her backstory, and I was more riveted than maybe ever before. Revealing that replicas can basically live indefinitely, and be completely separated from their originals changes so much of how I imagined them working. And then the emotional beats were just devastating. The mother knowing of her existence, and then trying to replace her comatose daughter with this version of Suzumi is beyond heartbreaking and deeply, deeply troubling from a moral and existential angle. Suzumi's love for her original is so skewed and weighty, programmed into her very self, but grating against her resentment for her entire existence. I can't get over how smoothly this show bounces between typical high school romance and the highest order of drama. Even A Replica Can Fall in Love is really good. That might not be particularly insightful, but I think it might be the important thing to say. I fully accept that I could just not have the majority opinion, but I can't believe that this is scoring below a 7 on my anime list. It's rare to have a premise this interesting, but to iterate and dive into it so thoroughly is truly special. If my opinion means anything to you, which totally fair if not, maybe give it an episode or two. I think you might be surprised at what you find. And if you have seen it already, give it some praise below. Give anyone who watches this video some more reasons to check out the anime. I know romance in general is a crowded space this season, but there's some really cool stuff going on with this one. And that ends today's episode of Love and Anime. If you enjoyed the video and like video essays about romance, anime, and romance anime, liking and subscribing helps a ton, as does hitting the hype button on the mobile app. I'm Slam Anime, and I'll see you next time.